Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In our study of the course of stylistics, we have reached to the understanding of the second concept that comes under foregrounding, that is parallelism. And we understand parallelism as rule breaking and creating balance, order and similarity in the text with the help of certain devices, which are the devices of repetition. Parallelism does not merely function as a repetition of words. As in the last lecture, we looked at certain functions of parallelism with respect to the elements, the element of identity and contrast. Now, the element of identity that is associated with parallelism and that mostly occurs in poetry for the sake of creating rhythm, balance, order and rhyme in poem, and also to help us remember the concept or the idea that the poet presents. Identity is something that makes us feel that there is similarity in the text, or there is identity at the level of the repetition of words or the recurrence of the images, items and elements of language. Now, when a writer repeats certain features in a text, the basic concern in repetition is to reiterate an idea for the sake of making it prominent, because repetition allows the reader to focus on those things which the writer has presented time and again for the sake of foregrounding it or highlighting it. In our daily talk also, when we want to advise somebody or when we want to make somebody understand our point of view, we repeat certain things. As repetition in the daily life also functions as a device or a mode of making our ideas clear to the reader, and also to help the reader or the listener understand what we are saying or writing. So same is the case with parallelism when it is a mere repetition or recurrence of images, ideas, objects and elements or features of a language. But this is just the first step that parallelism lets a reader take, because the repetition would aid memorability. It would help us understand some idea which, if is not repeated, would escape our mind. But repetition does not just function for the sake of creating rhythm, rhyme, balance or aiding memorability in the text, specifically poetry. Repetition has certain other functions too. When certain repetitive items are contrasted or are presented side by side with antithetical or paradoxical statements, it creates an element of contrast also along with identity. So identity and contrast are the two basic elements that parallelism makes use of. The contrast might be there in the form of meaning, but surface level would be similarity. For example, the instance of the lines that when I am dead, I hope it may be said, his sins were scarlet, his books were red. Now, the very word red had got two elements within it which have similarity at the level of pronunciation, but at the level of meaning they differ. One refers to the process of reading and the other refers to the color red, which is a pun within the word. Now, if the element of contrast highlights contradiction or two contradictory or opposing ideas, this is where parallelism functions to make the words or writing more complex, as just like deviation too, it may lead us that there might be other meanings also inherent within the text. Today we will have a look at how to interpret parallelism, and in the interpretation of parallelism, what are the specific functions that parallelism performs in any literary writing, and how these functions can be located or understood by us as a learner or a student of stylistics, as our motive in understanding and learning the subject of stylistics is to be able to perform better and more sophisticated analysis of literary writings. So this understanding of the various concepts, either it is a theory of foregrounding or the element of deviation and parallelism within foregrounding, or it is the understanding of the value of linguistics for text analysis, or whether it is the understanding of the importance of literary criticism for the study of stylistics. We are doing that as an exercise for the sake of making ourselves experts in analyzing texts, interpreting texts, and commenting upon the text. So this understanding about parallelism would also lead us to perform better, more sophisticated and more rigorous analysis of the literary works. We would look beyond this particular fact that parallelism as a mere repetition allows the writer to create a surface beauty in the text in the form of creating rhythm, rhyme in poetry and making it memorable. Now, what other functions lie behind the use of parallelism, and how are they to be interpreted? Because it is the understanding of the function and the importance of parallelism in a literary writing that would lead us to its understanding, and we will appreciate better the writer's skill as well as the hidden ways in which texts operate, and the text's operations or working is the basic concern for a stylistician. Let us have a look at the major functions that parallelism performs in a text, because our aim is to interpret parallelism. What lies behind parallelism? Why has it been created by the writer, and how does it function? The first function that parallelism performs in a literary writing is that it creates rhetorical emphasis, or it is connected with rhetorical emphasis. Now, what is meant by rhetorical emphasis? We know that the art of speech, the art of communication, demands that we convince the person whom we are addressing. Either a writer chooses to compose a poem, or write an essay, or a short story. The stance or the point of view that the writer holds is what he wishes to affect the reader with. So for that, he needs certain devices which would create rhetorical emphasis, that the speech and utterance should be so powerful and be constructed in such a way that it has an impact on the audience or the reader. Rhetorical emphasis is where you find how gradually a writer would come to a point that he wishes to stress. This is what we would study today with the help of a few examples too, that how parallelism would create rhetorical emphasis. The second function in a cursory glance is that parallelism helps in memorizing whatever we read or listen to. So it aids memorability. That is a very basic function of parallelism, that it's no wonder that we remember the nursery rhymes that we read years ago in our childhood in the school or in the nursery classes, and without even ever reading them again, we still have that recollection. It is not just that the memories of childhood are more fresh and awake, but it is because of the very style adopted in those nursery rhymes or children's songs that aid memorability. The rhythm, that is internal rhyme, as well as the end rhyme, that helps in memorizing the poem, and it becomes something that we never forget. It leaves a lasting impression. That is all because of parallelism. Then another function of parallelism is that it connects the elements of identity and contrast. We have seen that in the last lecture too, that how the element of identity can be connected with contrast. There might be identity at the superficial level, at the level of sound, at the level of phonology or morphology, but at the level of meaning or semantic level, there might be a pun, there might be a paradox, or there might be an antithesis that exists to narrate that within the apparently similar or identical structures, there is also a contrast that highlights the ambiguity, the disorder, the contradiction, that is found in the theme or idea that the writer wishes to present, and that is why the apparent similarity is highlighting a contrast. That is where the foregrounding occurs. Another important element or function that is found in the parallelism is that it leads to a climax. Now, when we say that an idea can be built upon like a ladder, or it can be gradually developed rather than too bluntly or directly presented before the reader. This building up of thought upon thought and gradually moving from something lighter to more forceful is possible through parallelism. So parallelism adds force to rhetoric. It gives strength to the utterance of the writer, and the writers deliberately plan their writing to gradually reveal what is the more important and profounder an idea. So climax is the peak. So at the peak or at the very top of the utterance or writing would lie some idea which is more important, more forceful, and that is where the crux of the poem or a text lies. So it is through parallelism, a gradual development of a thought that is confined within words of similarity and order, identity and contrast, that would lead us gradually towards a climax, so that it does not appear abrupt or shocking, unbelievable, or even rude to the reader. So this is at a glance the major functions of parallelism, and these functions can only be located by a stylistician or an analyst when he has the understanding of the intricacies of the functions of parallelism. So we will look at these functions of parallelism for the sake of interpreting what functions and importance does parallelism hold in literary writings, and we will look at it with reference to poetry again, and one by one each of these functions will be explained today. Let us see in detail the first function of parallelism, that is the most simpler one, that is that parallelism helps in memorizing or remembering what we read or what we listen to. So the most basic and simple function of parallelism is that it aids memorability. When we see parallelism as a device that sets two things as equivalent, and it is a relationship of equivalence between two elements of language, we identify the similarity in structure or the identity in structure, or the repetition that occurs on the elements of language or the objects that the writer has put side by side in a text. So the similarity in structure, that is the identity created through repetition of words, adds to create rhythm, balance, rhyme in the structure. The composition sounds rhythmic, sounds balanced, and hence it is easy to remember. Now this is one of the very prominent features of stylistics, that when you are looking at a style, you differentiate the style of lyrics from that of ballad or sonnet or other works of writing, because a lyric is composed with the help of certain devices which create rhyme and rhythm in poetry. So the rhythm and similarity that is created with the help of parallel structures and parallel identical sounds, it makes the utterances easy to remember, and that is why poets rely heavily on the use of parallelism, because poetry has got an element that is it breaks the rules or conventions of syntax. When the syntax is inverted, it leads to create an utterance that is different from a saying, or that is different from prose. So any idea that the writer presents by inverting the syntax of a sentence or by putting the words in odd places for the sake of emphasis too would be a parallel structure. Look at this example. I will complain yet praise. I will bewail, approve, and all my sore sweet days I will lament and love. Now observe this example, that reading it for the first time, you remember a few of the lines or phrases from it. That is because of the verbal repetition of the a statement, that is I will. The lines begin with I will complain yet praise. I will bewail, approve. Now in place of praise occurs approve, in place of complain occurs bewail, and all my sore sweet days. Now the alliteration on sore sweet creates balance, and then the monosyllabic words like sore and sweet, they are uttered so quickly that the line that appears a bit longer as compared to the third one is uttered too quickly or smoothly. And I will lament and love. Now this idea of complain yet praise is matched with lament and love in the last line. So observing this balance, order, rhythm, rhyme, repetition, even alliteration, we feel that these are the features which the writer has presented as prominent in the writing, because he wants to lead us to the idea that he will obey, complain, praise, or mourn, and then the idea of the days which are tragic, at the same time happy days of his life. But the resolve of the speaker is that despite all the odds, he would not give up love. Now to lead us to the idea that love is what he would choose over any other thing, despite its tragedies, despite its sorrows, is presented by the balanced segments of the lines as I will complain, I will bewail, and praise, approve, then lament. Now all these verbs help to create the same balance that creates order, that he refers to the verb of complaining in the first line, then praising, bewailing, and approving, then lamenting. So complain, bewail, and lament are segmented together as three actions of the same kind that are quite tragic or sore. Then praise and approve and love are the positive traits or the positive outcomes that he has derived from the feeling of love. So he puts this balance and order. We can notice the antithesis as well, that despite identity between these words like complain, bewail, and lament, we find contrast of complain, bewail, and lament with praise, approve, and love. So the positivity and the negativity is in balance or in order when the persona is weighing or judging the pros and cons of being in love. And that is done so briefly, so crisply, with the help of parallelism, repetition of structures by creating identity, and then the contrast that is highlighted by the antithetical words or statements that put the message across to the reader in such a way that it is forceful, it is pithy or compact, and it is memorable. Another function that parallelism performs, apart from aiding memorability, creating identity and contrast, that function is that it is used for creating rhetorical emphasis. Rhetoric is the art of speech, the art of convincing people, the art of putting across your ideas in such a way that they have an impact, they have an effect on the audience. Either the audience is the reader or the audience is the listener. Linguistic parallelism is very often connected with rhetorical emphasis, because you may have seen this in the speeches of the politicians too, or the speeches of the religious scholars in their sermons as well, that how they present idea. For example, I earlier discussed the same example to you people, that democracy is the government of the people, for the people, by the people. Now here the repetition has emphasized on the idea that people are important. In democracy, it is the country, the public, the common man who holds significance. That is why the word people is repeated 3 times. Government of the people, for the people, and by the people. The change shows that in every aspect it is the public, it is the humanity, the common people who are important for democracy or in a democratic government. So here too, in the examples that we study from literary writings, the rhetorical emphasis plays a major role because it has been created with the help of parallel structures. Formal parallelism is combined with an implication of contrast as well. That the term antithesis is most suitably and most readily applied to the understanding of anything that is emphasized by the writer or that is made prominent in the text by the writer. The connection is either of the similarity or of contrast. So if a writer wants to emphasize an idea, either he would put that idea with its contrast or with its opposite, so that something becomes more prominent when it would be analyzed or judged against its opposite. For example, dark and light would be put together to make the reader see what is more positive or what is negative or evil. So look at this example that would highlight that how, for the sake of rhetorical emphasis, a writer or a poet would put contrasting or antithetical ideas together apart from the similarity that he has tried to enact in the writing. Observe this example that states, "He raised a mortal to the skies, she drew an angel down." It's easy to remember this line. He raised a mortal to the skies and she drew an angel down. Now, if you observe this line, there are ideas which are contradictory, there are ideas which are similar, which occur within the 2 lines. We see the first sentence focusing on the subject, that is he, a man, or maybe a being that is male, or referred to maybe to God as well. Then the second line chooses its subject as she. Now there is similarity that both are either living beings, human beings. There is contrast as one is man and one is woman. So there is binary of male, female. Then raised, it contradicts or it contrasts with the act of drawing down in the second line. Raise and drew are the opposite actions. Raise is to make somebody go higher, and drawing is to draw somebody towards the ground. Then a mortal and an angel. There is a contrast again between mortal, man, and angel, that is a being that is not prone to death or decay the way a human being would be, or that is not confined to the mortal world. Then skies contrasts with down, that is a reference to earth. So look, the similarity is in the actions. He performed something and she also performed something, but what that action is opposite. That he raised somebody to heights who was not capable of reaching to the heights because that was mortal, and she, the woman, is responsible for drawing or throwing somebody down, and that somebody was not mortal or man but an angel. So at that level there exists a contrast. That disconnection between the verbs in these lines is that of similarity as well as of contrast. The similarity lies only at the level of structure, selection of verbs and subject as he and she, and the contrast lies at the level of the opposition in the actions. That raising is the opposite of drawing down, mortal is the opposite of the angel, sky is the opposite of earth or down. So look how the contrast is creating emphasis. How is it emphasized now? That is what is to be understood. The raising of a mortal to the sky wouldn't have appeared to be a very benevolent or marvelous an act had it not been accompanied by somebody else acting as bringing people down. So when the action of one man is contrasted with the action of somebody else, here it is contrasted with the female's action of drawing an angel down, performing an opposite deed, then the value of the woman's action appears more fatal, more tragic, more brutal, and more negative, because the action mentioned earlier associated with man, that is positive action of bringing a mortal to the level of immortality by raising him to the sky, to the heavens, to the height. So the condemnation of the woman's act, as she is responsible for bringing somebody down, or she is responsible for somebody's fall, and that somebody who was an angel, becomes more forceful. So if you emphasize an idea by putting it side by side with its opposite, only then it's more visible for the reader to judge its value. Just the way we say that if there is light, then the importance of darkness, or the value of darkness, or maybe the negativity of darkness would be more clear. So if two ideas that are contrasting ideas, contradictory ideas, or opposing ideas, if they are put together, you are able to see the beauty or the importance of one of those two ideas, because you have got both the negative and the positive lying there before you. So this is how rhetorical emphasis is created, by putting two contradictory elements or opposing elements side by side, so that the reader judges one by matching its force against the other. So we put this parallel, rather the writer has put a negative action parallel to a positive one, and when negative and positive are put parallel or together, the reader does the rest of the task by seeing what appears more grotesque, more evil, more full of impact and consequences, as it is done over here. That raising of a mortal to the skies appears more benevolent an act, and the drawing of an angel down, when compared with that, appears to be very brutal and evil in action. Observe a few more examples for the sake of understanding rhetorical emphasis that is created through the use of parallelism. These are the lines taken from John Donne's Holy Sonnet, where he says, "Take me to you, imprison me, for I." Now look at this line, how it is balanced. Take me to you, imprison me, for I. Now, take and imprison, they are corresponding, which is something that is not changed. That is the next word, me. And to is replaced by a comma, and then to you is turned into for I. Then, except you enthrall me, never shall be free. So instead of repeating I, he has omitted that and created a balance by putting a comma. Except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. Now the contrast between you and me, chaste and ravish, enthrall and free, take and imprison, is what is adding force or rhetorical emphasis in the lines or in the poem. So taking, adopting, imprisoning are creating similarity. If you take somebody, you own somebody, that is equal to imprisonment. Then enthrall, and then never be free. So enthrall is something when somebody is captivated or captured, but free is the opposite of capturing and captivating. Then chaste contradicts with ravished. Something that is ravished loses its chastity, but the claim that chastity can never be achieved unless he is enthralled or he is broken by God, whom he is addressing as the listener, implied listener in the poem. So here the force of the idea that the speaker wants God to break him down like a ravisher so that he can be made anew comes with great force when he uses the image of taking, capturing, makes it contradict or contrast with the idea of freedom and slavery or imprisonment or enthrallment. Then how chastity can be achieved only by being ravished or broken down or torn down by God. So apart from this example, observe another example that is from the modern American poetry by T.S. Eliot. Eliot makes use of repetition for the sake of memorability, for the sake of rhyme, for the sake of adding musical quality to the poem. Apart from that, he also uses repetition or parallelism to lead us to the climax or the most significant thought or idea, which is built up or led by the force of the words gradually and quite steadily. This is an example from T.S. Eliot's famous poem The Hollow Man, in which he says, "This is the dead land, this is the cactus land. Here the stone images are raised, here they receive supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star." Observe these lines, that how the first two lines correspond at the level of anaphora or mere repetition. Only the word dead is replaced by the word cactus. Now, the word dead, though replaced with cactus, conveys the similar meaning of death, decay, or hell, or pain, as the dead land or the cactus land give the image of a desert, a place where there is no water, where there is no shelter, where there is pain, thirst, perspiration, hunger, or hardship. The dead land and the cactus land is the land where nothing grows, nothing comes as a relaxation, as a refuge, or as a kind of comfort or soothing thing. Then the word stone replaces the word dead and cactus. And the similarity is found even between this and here, as they show reference to a place with the immediacy, as if it is a place right there before us. It is not that place or there, rather it is this and here, which is here, present or immediate and visible. In the first line it was the word dead, which conveyed the sense of some place that is maybe a God-forsaken land or hell. Then in the second line, the same idea of a place that is a God-forsaken land or a desert-like place that resembles hell is highlighted by the use of the word cactus, that reveals the image of thorns. Now, death, thorns, and then stone. Look how idea is built up, that for the dead, life would be deserted, life would be a kind of thirst or hunger perceived or experienced in a desert, and it will be a life led among stones, not human beings, or the image of lifelessness. Look how these ideas are put side by side, creating a parallel structure or aiding to the force of the words and images and themes, that death with cactus or the cactus land, that is a thorny place, and then stone images, that is giving the image of lifelessness and death. Then the word is used, that is the word raised. Images are raised and they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. Now, raising receiving, supplication, and then reference to dead man and the twinkling of the fading star. Now the fading star corresponds with the idea that is of death, cactus land and stone images, because here is no hope. So hopelessness that was created in the beginning of the lines with reference to dead land, cactus land and stone images is strengthened by the fading of the star. That star is fading as hope is dying and fading. And the image of death is again strengthened by the supplication of a dead man's hand. So this is how the climax is achieved. This is how emphasis is laid upon particular words which correspond at the level of, you can say, either syntax, semantics, or even sound and the lexical category. And when these are observed in detail, minutely, they reveal that they are also at a level conveying the idea of similarity, which is put before the reader. Within it would be some ideas which would be contrasting to the other. So this is how rhetorical emphasis is built up in a writing with the help of parallelism, where the writer would make use of words and structures which seem identical, which seem repetitions, but within those repetitions he would lead us forward rather than to take us in a way which would be too abrupt or quick. So instead of making it an abrupt or a quick movement or a jump from one thought to another, the thought that hope has disappeared had been strengthened by the gradual images of death, thorn, cactus, stones, and then dead man, and the twinkling and fading of a star. The fading of a star reveals the revelation being forgotten, the knowledge of the religion being forgotten or overlooked. And then that is how the land has turned into a dead land or a cactus land. So a land is dead where there is no knowledge, and the fading star reveals the knowledge or the guidance of prophets or God. So this is the very point of the reason of exhibiting the decay and death. That is where the writer wanted us to lead to, for the sake of creating emphasis upon certain words which he feels are of importance for the reader to focus on. Another important function that parallelism performs is that it leads towards climax. Now climax is the most thrilling or important part or phase in the idea. Either you notice it in the terms of action in a story or a novel, or in poetry you notice it in terms of the idea. Another expectation raised by parallelism is that if there are two or more than two phrases to the pattern, it moves towards climax. So a writer, with the help of creating equivalent patterns, may introduce a little variety and shift or move from the similarity of the order towards a little difference in the order. He says, if you prick us, do we not bleed? For the sake of understanding how parallelism leads us to a climax. Climax is the peak, the very height of some thought, where the writer would like to take the reader gradually. So if you prick us, that is taken from Shakespeare's very famous play, Merchant of Venice. In this tragicomedy, the writer has uttered certain words through the expression of the characters that lead us to understand the idea of climax achieved through parallelism. Now observe how climax is achieved or reached to through the help of parallelism. He says, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Now observe this line that starts with, if you prick us, do we not bleed? Now look at the structure of the rest of the three lines. that these three lines that follow, if you prick us, do we not bleed, follow the same structure, with the help of a slight change in the form of the change of verb. That prick changes into tickle, bleed changes into laugh. If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? And then in the third line, prick and tickle change into poison, and bleed and laugh change into die. And then the fourth line, prick, bleed, prick, tickle, poison are replaced with wrong, and bleed, laugh and die are replaced with revenge. Now, the theme of the novel, the theme of the play, Merchant of Venice. As the theme of the play, Merchant of Venice, is revenge and the idea of mercy. That is why the writer has relied on creating a parallel structure to forcefully emphasize upon the idea of revenge. Now, the emotive force of the word revenge comes forcefully when it is built up or led towards gradually through the building up of certain bricks like prick, bleed, tickle, laugh, poison, die, wrong and revenge. So the idea or the theme of the play, that is revenge, how the idea of revenge can ruin somebody's life, what is the importance of justice and mercy, and how in a feeling of revenge justice or mercy can be applied, and how they function or act in a person's life. If that is the basic theme of the play Merchant of Venice, the emotive force of the word revenge comes after something that is action of killing, like bleed, laughing like through trickling, and death through poisoning. Now it is underlined by a slight variation too in the pattern. Observe that the last line has an alternate or a different pattern, as the word do is replaced by shall. So when it is replaced by shall, this slight change makes us understand it's a kind of a signal in the parallel structure that now comes something more important. So prick, bleed, trickle, laugh, poison, die are less forceful than what lies at the very climax, that is the idea of revenge. And its slight variation in the composition and patterning of the grammatical structure with the replacement of shall with do makes us understand that how in a parallel structure the writer may try to shift or introduce a little variety so that force can be added. So this is how rhetorical emphasis can be created. It is like building up of emotions of the reader, building up a thought upon thought, so that the reader, when he reads sentences or the utterances, these utterances and sentences have an effect on him. They have a sort of lasting impression on the reader's mind, because through parallelism, a writer is presenting something that would have sound more abrupt or more, you can say, unbearable. But the idea of something that would appear painful, unbearable, and too forceful, an attack on the understanding, it is compensated by building it up in such a way that it gradually reaches to the reader. So the idea of death and bleeding, pricking or tickle, is also related to creating pain. When you prick somebody, you are agonizing somebody and he is feeling irritated. But that is not so painful, that is not harmful. When you prick somebody, it leads to bleeding, but it doesn't kill. It doesn't destroy a life. It is just a simple act of pinching somebody and pricking somebody that would just lead to spilling of a drop of blood or two. But if you poison somebody, that poisoning would lead to death, and death would too be less harmful than revenge. That is what the writer implies through parallelism, through a composition that leads to a climax. Now, why is death lesser in terms of degree or pain than revenge? Because death would ease the pain, that would seize the life, but revenge would keep the both the lives burning. The person who takes revenge too would be in agitation or frustration. He would be in a constant feeling of pain and agitation. The peace would be lost, and the victim, who is the victim of the feeling of revenge, too would be a sufferer. So in that case, revenge is more powerful and more painful than poisoning somebody to death. So if this is the message of the play, if this is the major theme of the play, look how you can say more sophisticatedly and how much in a sort of organized a manner, with the help of parallelism, the writer has led us to reach to this climax. Now, since climax seems to be a little new thing to be associated with the parallelism, as we have observed that parallelism functions to create memorability, to aid memorability, and for the sake of also rhetorical emphasis, when you want to put stress on an idea, you make use of repetition, and parallelism or even contrast is embedded within the identity that is created between words and ideas. For the sake of understanding climax, because climax is a point which is the height of the situation, which is the culmination of events and the very important idea or thought in a writing. He says, the best laid schemes, O mice and men. Now, this is a very small and short a line or a phrase. Within it too you notice climax. Within it you also notice the putting of on part of the writer a thought that is too heavy to bear, but how through a parallel structure that climax is achieved. Observe in this line, that is by Robert Burns, taken from his poem To a Mouse. Now here you see the best laid schemes, O mice and men. We see the relationship of similarity between the two objects, that are mice and men. Now, there is similarity. As we are locating parallelism in structures, the first thing, for the sake of understanding how parallelism operates and functions in a writing, we locate similarity. Now, where does similarity exist in these two objects? Mice, men. If you utter it aloud, if you speak it aloud, they both are monosyllabic. Mice and men, both the words cannot be divided into two syllables, so they are monosyllabic. This is one similarity. Now, the second similarity occurs at the level of phonology. Both start with m sound, mice, men. So, apart from being monosyllabic, these are the words which are phonologically, same. So, the phonological resemblance of the sound of m makes them equivalent. Then another equivalence that can be found at the level of idea rather than sound is that both are the creations of God, both are the living beings. So these are the three levels at which we identify similarity or identity. That is one of the features of parallelism. Now, after locating this identity or similarity in the words and ideas as monosyllabic words, as phonological resemblance found on both the words, the repetition of the m sound, and also the correspondence between these two words as the living beings, the creations of God. We move towards the second step, that is one of the most significant features of parallelism, that is contrast. That it is not possible that a writer would convey an idea or a theme or foreground something by parallel structure, and he may not give importance to something that can be contradictory or that can be opposing the idea that is apparent. Now, after identifying the similarity, when we move to identify the contrast, we find that men and mice contrast at the level of respect and dignity and value too. Man, the acme of the creation, the most, you can say, perfect, supreme head of creation, it contrasts with something that has been put side by side with it as if it is same. And what that thing is? Mice, who are filthy, insignificant, ordinary and creepy creature. So they match at the level that they are both living beings, but they contrast with each other because one is the acme of the creation and the other is the lowest of the creation from among the insects or the crawling creepy creatures. Now, if mouse is the tiniest and most inconsequential of creatures, we think that it is contrasting with the idea of man, who is rational, who is powerful, who is more neat or nice or better, as a mouse is dark, filthy, dirty, or it gives a feeling of disgust too. Whereas from man you expect some dignity, some honor and respect. Now, at the level of idea, man contrasts with mice. But look at the very meaning, that is twofold, because there is a scheme in the writer's mind that we firstly appreciate the referential contrast between man and mice. That man, though, is supreme head of the creation, powerful, dignified, respectful, rational, and the reason of the creation of the world as well, he has been put side by side with mice. So in the address, O mice and men, the apostrophe O addresses mice and men as if they are maybe two people together, just the way you say, it's quite thought-provoking, that just the way somebody addressing the audience would say, ladies and gentlemen, respecting both females and males in the audience. But mice and men do not have any similarity. Now if they are put side by side or together, that is to highlight the contrast, that contrast between their existence, and then the emphasis on the similarity between their fate, that the conjunction add links the two words, mice and men. So we appreciate a similarity between man and mouse. Now what is the similarity? Man, who is supreme, but as insignificant when it comes to his actions, that he is equal to a mouse. So who is in the sentiment of the passage that the same status of vulnerability of fate is what he is prone to. So what the parallelistic bond between the two seems to suggest is that creatures superficially or apparently different are basically the same when it comes to handling fate. So men and mice, their lives are insignificant when they have to look at it from the perspective that they have no free will, no design of their own to change their life. And then if you look at it from the perspective of an indictment on the deterioration of the modern man, then the modern man's deterioration reveals that he is no better than mice. So this is where the similarity begins to function, as it is where parallelism makes its presence felt more forcefully. That identity is created to reveal a contrast, but within that contrast, the irony of the situation is highlighted, that how men and mice, who are apparently different, are the same at the level of their vulnerability towards fate and their grotesque actions, which make a man stoop or fall to the very same level where a mouse or a filthy creature lies. So observe how climax has functioned in parallelism to describe its impact as a device or as a technique for bringing something to the foreground, because climax is the very height, or climax is the very point where you feel that the writer wishes the reader to focus on. So if a reader is led gradually to a point, then it should be with the help of parallelism. So observing these examples from different texts, we have seen that in the study of the style of a language, especially the style that is poetic style or literary style, parallelism may appear quite baffling or confusing, because most of the critics or the readers or stylisticians and even the learners of stylistics are deceived by the very simplicity and the nature of parallelism, because it is perceived that parallelism is only a device that is used for the sake of creating order, repetition, balance, rhyme, rhythm, and similarity in a text. And it is more, to the musical effects of an utterance or a writing that parallelism functions for. But we have seen through the study of different functions of parallelism, through the study of different elements of parallelism, that how the apparent structure of parallelism that operates at the level of creating identity and similarity can be baffling and confusing and is worth giving a thought or interpretation to, because there is a design, there is a foregrounded element within that. Now, if you observe these elements that are relied upon by a writer for the sake of interpretation of parallelism, you feel that parallelism too is like deviation, a device or a technique that demands a skillful and analytical approach for analysis. So if you discern something in the form of simple or mere repetition and are tempted by the look only or by the surface value only, you will realize that it is just a facade, or it is just the appearance of parallelism. Observe these lines which we have seen as examples. They would help you understand that how you looked at these lines merely to be repetition of the word I will. So any novice or any layman who is not familiar with the intricacy of parallelism would be overlooking the function of parallelism, and the identity would be picked out, but the contrast will be missed out. If we hadn't been aware of the functions of parallelism as identity and contrast, leading to climax and also creating rhetorical emphasis, we in our analysis of these lines, I will complain yet praise, I will bewail, approve, and all my sore sweet days I will lament and love. Here, any layman would have pointed out just the elements of repetition as I will that occurs in the second line as well and the third line as well. Then maybe he would have picked out the words sweet and sour as alliterative. Now, is this the mere identification of parallelism? No. This is merely identification of similarity in pattern, repetition in pattern. And as we have studied that parallelism is something more than mere repetition created through similarity of words. Within the equivalent structures, there is also found the element of contrast, and that contrast we found in the elements which are put side by side complain contrasting with praise, bewail contrasting with approve, and lament contrasting with love. Now, these contrasts reveal the idea that parallelism goes far more farther than just being a device of memorability, a device of creating similarity and identity in the structures and in the utterances. Then you look at the example, he raised a mortal to the skies, she drew an angel down. Here also the identity is between the actions, the action of responsibility or controlling somebody's life. The similarities between the subject who are humans. It's not that one is man and another is an animal, one is God or another is a being or a mortal being. Similarity at the level of subject, as they are both humans. Similarity at the level of actions, which are controlling or manipulating somebody else's life, is found to be the most striking one. Then we find similarity at the level of verb form or grammatical similarity, or similarity at the level of the use of tense, that is past tense. Raised, drew, create an idea that it is the past form of the verb that is used, that is third form. So you can see that it's something that is evident in the terms of similarity in the structure. But if you go to the second level of identifying contrast, as it is one of the ways parallelism operates in a text or in literary writing, you locate here the idea of an act that is contradictory. Raise contradicts with drawing something down. Mortal contradicts with angel. And then skies is antithetical to down or the earth. Now, these contrasts highlight the force of the action, the brutality of the action of one when compared with that of the other. The woman's act of throwing down or bringing down an angel, and the man's act of raising a mortal, they both become forceful. The positivity of the man's act becomes forceful when compared with the negativity or the evil of the woman's act. So this is how the contrast lays bare before the reader the force, the significance of an idea. So look how complicated, how difficult it becomes for the sake of interpretation, that a reader must not be confused or baffled or taken aback only by the jumbled up sentences which are merely antithetical, paradoxical. But this antithesis or paradoxical idea is what operates within an organized structure that is parallel. Now, their organization is in the form of the use of tense, the ed form, the second form of the word, and then between the action of elevating something and bringing something down. So, as a reader, after identifying the similarity, we identify the antithesis and the connection that is of similarity as well as of contrast within these lines. Now, when we talked about rhetorical emphasis, we were focusing on this idea that the art of rhetoric or the skill of rhetoric implies that we want to impress somebody, we want to convince somebody, we want to make somebody agree with our argument or point of view. So if rhetorical emphasis is something that comes gradually, like in this line that we observed, take me to you, imprison me. Now, taking something is a very harmless act, but how this taking, when turns into imprisonment, becomes forceful. When somebody takes you, adopts you, it's not something that appears to be having negative connotations. But taking is now intensified in the second phrase with the help of the use of the word imprisonment. Then the idea of enthralling somebody or captivating somebody is associated with the contradiction that enthralling or captivating somebody would in fact be the freedom. Now this is a paradox, that how one who is imprisoned, enthralled, captivated or under siege could be free at the same time. We understand that when he leads us to the emphasis or the point of height or idea that he wants to achieve salvation, that is chastity or purity, and that state of chastity and purity and salvation would only be granted if he will be ravished by God. As it's a holy sonnet by Donne, he's addressing God, that God should break him, God should imprison him, take him in his custody. Now the imprisonment with God, as in this parallel structure has been revealed, would be his freedom, would be his salvation, and that will be possible only through the speaker being ravished, enthralled, imprisoned, broken and torn down by God, and then he will be made anew in the afterlife. So look how this rhetorical emphasis with the help of parallelism, that take me to you, imprison me for I, except you enthrall me, now take me and you, that is where he, it replaces the word you with me. Then the rhyme too, that is free and for, and also enthrall, this never, nor ever chaste except you ravish me. Then the balance of the structure that matches with the first one, take me to you, imprison me for I, nor ever chaste except you ravish me, is what the third line matches with at the level of syntax and the structure. So rhetorical emphasis is where the writer wishes the reader to focus his attention. So gradually, by the idea of taking somebody, imprisoning somebody, captivating somebody, freeing somebody and ravishing somebody and chastising somebody, how it is revealed with the help of the gradual building up of the thought and connection of a thought with what had been previously commented upon. As in the next example that we observed, for the sake of understanding of rhetorical emphasis, that emphasis upon the fading of the light of reason, the light of knowledge, the light of religion, as embodied in the image of a star, that is a reference to a prophet's life or the life of Christ, or even the eye of God, that is of mercy in the form of a star. Now how is it led towards, the reader is led towards that thought through the idea of dead land, then repetition, this is the dead land, then repetition of this is the cactus land, then instead of this, the writer chooses in the next line a variety that is parallel, because this and here have not much difference. Here the stone images, now land turns into image, and stone into, stone is what replaces the word cactus. And raised here, they receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a star. Now the twinkle of a star is the very dim light, where it's the image of the hell or a desert or an island that is a deserted island. So we see that emphasis is created with the help of parallel structures, where there would be gradual shift, where the writer would choose a variety of words in vocabulary so that something that he presents is expected by the reader, and that expectation is sort of met when we reach to a height of the situation with the help of structure which is parallel, identical, and at the same time includes elements which are contradictory, antithetical, paradoxical, and contrasting. Apart from that, rhetorical emphasis, climax is also achieved by the help of parallelism. That climax is the very focal point or the major idea to which a writer wants us to lead. Just the way we observed the lines from Merchant of Venice, that the theme of revenge is highlighted when the writer explains with parallel structure that pricking somebody, trickling somebody, and poisoning somebody is less harmful than revenge. That would be more, painful or poisonous than any other thing in life, because it would keep the person taking revenge and the victim of the revenge in a constant state of unease or disturbance. So we see the emotive or the emotional effect of placing the word revenge after the word poison, wrong, tickle, and bleed. So these examples reveal that a slight variation on part of the writer, where he is building up a thought upon a thought that would lead us to a climax, is one of the very important ways through which writers make use of parallelism. And parallelism achieves the effect of leading a reader towards the main thought or the crux of the poem or the story, which might not be possible for a reader to reach to had it been abruptly or too directly been expressed by the writer. So today we had a look in detail at the important functions of parallelism, in which we observed with the help of examples how one of the basic purposes of parallelism, that is to aid to memorability, that we also associate that how songs and rhymes and nursery rhymes and even jingles of certain ads keep alive in our memory, because they operate on the idea or the principle of parallelism, that is the repetition of words. Apart from aiding memorability, another function that we observe in today's lecture is the connection of parallelism with rhetorical emphasis, that it is a point which is to be emphasized, which is to be presented as forcefully. That is where parallel structure would lead the reader to. Then it also leads to climax, because the most important thought or the intense or heightened situation is where the reader would be led by the use of parallelism by the writer. Then another element that we covered in the last lecture also, that is also one of the functions or the reasons of the use of parallelism, is that elements which are identical are baffling and confusing, because within the identity would also be found a contrast or a contradiction or antithesis. So it is important to analyze or interpret parallelism, because parallelism helps us to reach to the interpretation of a text or an idea, because the writer's purpose is not just to create identical, similar, symmetrical or parallel structures for the sake of beautifying the text externally, as apparently parallelism seems to be a device to apparently and formally make a text or a writing seem symmetrical or rhythmic. But within that apparent symmetry, rhythm, balance and harmony would be more contradictory, antithetical and paradoxical ideas, because of the very fact that parallelism also operates with the principle of creating contrast. So when the contrasts are created, these contrasts also lead us to climax and also are used for the sake of rhetorical emphasis. So today we had an extensive and a very detailed look at the functions of parallelism from the object of the attention or for the reader, that is the balance and the structure, either it is identity or contrast, or the memorability that parallelism adds to, or even whether it is rhetorical emphasis or leading the reader towards the climax or the crux of the idea or thought. So this is for today's lecture, the major functions that parallelism performs in a text, and how as a stylistician or as a learner of stylistics we are to interpret these functions and comment upon its value. In the next lecture we will be looking at a few important kinds of parallelism, just the way we looked at a few important kinds of deviation. Thank you.